sunny day. Beautiful. Rick, forgive me, I'll come right back. Rick likes me to be in front of the TV camera for the folks at home, but we'll be right back after these messages. I just want to get a little closer to everyone as we begin this morning, because it's so good to see you and it's so good to be in this presence here. And we're talking about the Sufi path today, Sufism, which is the mystical sect of Islam, and really espouses the idea of heart wisdom. And by heart wisdom, I mean that kind of wisdom that we sometimes have to go past the surface of things to get to the heart to get to the heart of the matter. Sometimes we have to overcome what might be the practical common sense of things to understand what's really going on. And thus when we study Sufism, we're often likely to find it in the medium of a poem, such as through someone like Rumi or Hafiz. We've probably heard many poems by them. Or through my preferred model, a joke, such as through the many tales that we may have heard from Mullah Nasruddin, who wasn't a historical figure that we know of, but is kind of a legend. He's kind of like the Islamic Pink Panther, in a sense, or Inspector Gadget for us younger people. One joke about Nasruddin goes like this. Nasruddin once declared, "I can see in the dark." "Well," a friend said, standing next to him, "how come you always walk around at night with a light?" "Well," Nasruddin replied, "I wouldn't want anyone else bumping into me." The heart wisdom in the joke is that Nasruddin is a mystic. He can see in the dark because he has the light of a spiritual understanding. But the funny part is that Nasruddin is also foolish because he's boasting and he's trying to communicate with people who don't understand the inner way. Central to Sufism is connection with what is called al-haq, which is a word to convey the idea of true reality, what is really real behind the veil. Beyond appearances, where is that heart place where we understand the deeper and grander truths of life? Another story about Nasruddin that I find even more profound is Nasruddin is having some financial problems, and so he needs to cut back on his budget. And so he decides to try feeding his mule a little less barley. So he goes a couple days feeding the mule a little less barley, and the mule seems fine, and so he decides to feed him a little less barley. The mule's getting a little sluggish, but he still seems happy, so he feeds the mule even a little less barley. One day he opens up the barn and finds that the mule has died. He cries out, "Oh no," just when he got used to not eating. Nasruddin in this joke, behind the scenes, is representative of what the Sufis refer to as the lower self. For many of us, the lower self is seen as our highest self because it's the self we live as the majority of the time. The mule in the story we could see is representing, for Sufis, the highest self, or the true self. For how many of us in this room have had that experience of when things get busy, when we start acting from a place of fear, or of survival, or of just getting by, for how many of us is the first thing to go nurturing our own soul, nurturing our own spirit? So many have been the times when I've had an extra busy week that I've taken even less time in the morning quiet. And if things got even busier, I would chide myself for even thinking about taking an afternoon walk or reading a book or listening to some music that I love. And what happens when we continue to not feed our soul, not feed our spirit, before we know it, we start to feel numb. Before we know it, as opposed to enlightening or bringing awareness into ourselves, we're trying to escape or numb ourselves. We look into the mirror and it feels like our spirit has died. Sometimes in my life, I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, but maybe you relate to it too. Sometimes I want to see how far I can go with my starving soul. I want to see how much I can suffer, as if by working continuously hard, I'm somehow going to impress somebody, including myself, by denying my spirit. Anyone ever done anything like that? And it's foolish, especially in my own life, when I've had the realization that nothing good comes to me but through my soul. I am unable to experience what is most valuable in my life, my relationships, my connections, my work, unless I am grounded in the consciousness of what is most sacred and valuable to me in my life. When I don't have that, it doesn't mean that the good isn't there, but I am unable to experience it, much less create or cultivate from it in a grander way. Even for folks who speak Arab, the term Sufi is a little confusing. No one really knows historically where the word Sufi comes from. Some people think it comes from the word for wool or fabric, that Sufism speaks to the idea of the fabric that contains all the universal truths of life. Other scholars believe that the word Sufi is derived from the Greek word Sophia, which means wisdom, and would also connect Sufism with that tradition of wisdom that we find in Plato and in other traditions. What all Sufis seek to practice is what is known as the threefold path. The threefold path that would connect one with this idea of al-haq, or what's really real in life. The threefold path is knowledge, love, and prayer. The Sufi seeks to practice knowledge, love, and prayer, and through this gets in touch with what is real in their lives, and it helps them manifest it into being. So it's good practice for us, perhaps, Sufis or no. This idea of knowledge in Sufism is often relative to this idea of nurturing and understanding of being our highest self in life. To begin to recognize that the lower self isn't as high as we think it is, and we can learn to live from a deeper aspect of our being. Rumi, the famous Sufi, wrote a poem about it. It goes like this. He says, "If you could get rid of yourself just once, the secret of secrets would open for you. The face of the unknown, hidden beyond the universe, would appear on the mirror of your perception." In the popular psychology of our culture, we often use this term ego to speak to the self we think we are, yet we know it as to be a limited self because who we are in some ways is always more than we think we can be. For the Sufis, it's similar, yet they recognize that the more we live from the lower self, the more self-destructive we become. The more we learn to cultivate a knowledge of our higher self, the more benefit we are to ourselves and those around us. Rumi compares the lower self to a dragon. It's lower, yet it's also quite dangerous. He tells a story about it. He says, a so-called dragon hunter went to the mountains to trap a dragon. He searched the mountains and finally discovered the frozen body of a great dragon in a cave high up on one of the tallest peaks. The man brought the body to Baghdad. He claimed he slew the dragon single-handed and exhibited it on the bank of the river. Hundreds of people came to see the dragon. The warmth of the Baghdad sun gradually warmed the dragon's body, and it began to stir, coming slowly out of its winter sleep. The people screamed and stampeded, and many were killed. The dragon hunter was frozen in fear, and the dragon ate him up in a single gulp. Your lower self, Rumi tells us, is that dragon, a savage, a bloody tyrant. It is not dead, merely frozen. Keep your dragon in the snow of self-discipline. Do not transport it to the sunshine of Baghdad. Let that dragon of yours remain dormant, should it be released, it will devour you. And have any of us here ever felt swallowed up by that lower self? By that part of us that felt driven to live from a place of fear or survival, that was willing to put others down in order to lift ourselves up, that acted out of rage or a sense of less than or of jealousy? To be swallowed up and to forget that life is really about living from a place of heart, of love, of our values and virtues, of creativity, of in and through each other, for knowledge of the divine, of hope, of what matters most to us. It's so easy to give in to the dragon, for it to be made into the monstrosity that it can become. But when we have that knowledge about ourselves, the dragon begins to shrink, doesn't it? It becomes frozen, and we're able, as Rumi says, to live in a greater self-discipline. But we only do this by continuously cultivating that knowledge of who we are within. Jesus, who is honored in all Sufi traditions as a master teacher, put it in the Gospel of Thomas in the way that he said, when you bring forth that which is inside of you, that which is inside of you will save you. If you do not bring forth that which is inside of you, that which is not inside of you will destroy you. It's up to us, in other words, in Jesus' harsh words, to cultivate and become the higher truth that is who we are, but we don't want it to just be impossibility. We want to bring it about for real. The second aspect of the threefold path of the Sufi is to love. I love the way that Hazrat Inayat Khan puts it. He says, to an angelic soul, love means glorification. To a genie, love means admiration. To a human soul, love means affection. To an animal soul, love means passion. One need not fall in love. One must rise through love. The Sufis do something unique to a lot of the other spiritual traditions, which may look at things of the world as things we should avoid. You know, alcohol's bad, sex is bad, anything that's fun is bad, right? Now, where the Sufi often refrains from these things, they are not afraid to use them as metaphors for connecting with the divine, especially this idea of romantic love. For example, in reading a Sufi poem, it wouldn't be odd at all to see a Sufi share about being drunk with the love of God, or comparing God to wine, even though the Sufi doesn't choose to partake generally in wine. They will also compare God to a great lover. They will compare a relationship with God like being the greatest divine romance there is. And they believe that something like a romantic relationship is our best way to learn about the love of God, that it is a great sacrament in which we can experience the divine and learn to love God to a greater degree in our lives. The lesson would be well taken, for example, to focus in on one beloved partner, to give your heart fully and completely to them, just like you would give your heart completely to the divine. There's an old Sufi story about a man who really gets the hots for a girl, and he's following her around, and he decides one day to meet up with her and declare his love for her. You're the only one for me. I love you so much. I adore you. There will never be anybody else. Please marry me. Well, the woman says, hold on just a second, because my sister's coming right from behind you, and she's much prettier than I am. The man turns around to look and see who's there, and the woman slaps him across the back of his head. I thought you said you loved only me, but now you're willing to look towards my sister. You know, proving the rule that a man is only as loyal as his options, right? That's a different kind of lower self thing. But the idea is to have that singularity of love, the singularity of focus on what the divinity is for us. So again, the Sufi isn't embarrassed to use something that's going on in our modern world as an example for God. So for some of us, we could say, God, you are like a never-ending Twitter feed of good news in my life. God, you are like my cell phone. You're the last thing I do before I go to bed at night, the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning. I will never turn you off, especially in church, even in church. So Sufis believe that learning to love in our lives through all of our relationships, especially ourselves, is a way to know al-haq, a way to know the true reality. The third aspect of the Sufi path for the Sufi is really the most important, and it's prayer. Prayer for the Sufi is the best way to be at one with a sense of the divine. It's important to recognize that for the Sufi, prayer isn't as it's seen by the majority of folks in our culture here in the States as a way to wish God to do something in your life or to ask God for his blessing in your life. Prayer for the Sufi is called recollection. It's about remembering the divine within yourself and all around you. It's about recalling your relationship with the divine presence, and within that recollection, the prayer is answered. It's similar to what Emerson said in the 19th century when he said that prayer is the highest form of thinking. For many of us to simply become and allow ourselves to be in a consciousness of the divine is to have our answered prayer right there with us. It's all that we really seek to do is to live in awareness that we are safe, that we are loved, that we are guided by a grace and a clarity from a higher and deeper source. Something I love about this practice of recollection is they say that the Sufis were the first group to use prayer beads, or what would become known to be the rosary. And they would put 99 beads on a bracelet or on a necklace, and they would count the 99 names of Allah. God the loving, God the forgiving, God the first, God the last, God the peaceful, God the merciful, God the creative, God the timeless, God the endless, God the human, God the present, God the indwelling, God the in infinitum, whatever it may be. And we can name God in all sorts of ways to declare and recollect, not from a place outside of us, but within us, those secret names of the Most High that we have forgotten to utter. Because when we can name them, they can take shape and hold in our lives in an incredible way. Something else I like about the Sufi practice of prayer is we don't have to be some different way. We can start the recollecting right where we are, wherever we are. Per Vilayat Khan, I'm sure I'm butchering his name, so I apologize to him, but the son of Israt Khan, he speaks to this simple but I think profound spiritual practice. He says, the practice of breathing in and out of the phrase toward the one can be done at almost any time. One should breathe in a most natural fashion without attempting to alter the breath in any way. You simply become one with your breath in whatever condition it may be in. The thought and feeling of oneness held in such a fashion allows a person to become united with whatever space or situation he finds himself in. Gradually, the boundaries of one's being dissolve. External distractions are overcome by merging with them, including them in overall compass by your being. I like this idea that you don't have to get holy, you just have to recall holiness. That in order to pray, you don't have to assume a holy position, or if you're sad, you don't have to not be sad in order to say a prayer, or if you're fear, you don't have to step out of fear in order to know love. The idea is that all spiritual balance and authenticity starts with an honoring and recognition of how we are in this very moment. And using the very tools that we have, our very breath, we move ourselves slowly towards that one that's always already been a part of us. The Sufis recognize that the threefold path, the goal of the threefold path, isn't a destination. It's the singularity of each step that we take, having that awareness of divine love. Muhammad, to whom many Sufis is the master teacher for them, says that it is said that when you take one step towards God, God takes 10 steps towards you. May it also be known as well that God is always with us. This is part of the divine contradiction of heart wisdom, that it is true when we step towards the Spirit, it steps towards us. But let us also remember that it is true that God is always with us. And may each of us remember that our understanding of what is most sacred in our lives is always with us. So just taking a prayerful moment in closing today, just invite us to become aware of the presence of the sacred in our lives. Knowing that as we choose, if we choose, to walk our path with knowledge, with love, with prayerfulness, we can begin to see God everywhere, in each person, in each event. We begin to behold a greater vision for being. The Sufis also teach that when we see God's love, we are beholding for the presence of God himself. To behold his creation, to see the world as it is and as it can be, to hold for each of us a more perfect vision for who we are, even when we cannot hold it for ourselves. So accepting this vision that much more fully, downloading it a little bit more and more with each step, with each deepening of awareness, may it take hold and continue to grow in incredible ways in our life. And so it is. Thanks for your time, everyone, this morning.